privilege and honor to be with you this morning. And on the screen, you see over here, it says, knowledge will be your stability. Knowledge is information, and that will be your stability. And therefore, misinformation will lead to instability. So, we're going to look at some information today, and I hope that'll be stabilizing to you. If you look at the screen out there, it says science versus science. So, the word science is mentioned two times. So, I think we should first deal with that word science. The root meaning of the word is actually just information or knowledge. What do you have for breakfast this morning? Anyone? Oatmeal, okay, that was a scientific statement. It really is, because the root word is just say what is true. So if you had oatmeal for breakfast and it was true, then that is a scientific statement. But of course, we don't use it that way. We use it in a different way. And the second meaning is a vague idea of what science is. You know, they say science says this or science has established this. It's a very loose way of using the word. It means, I know better than you. That's all it says. Science says. But the precise meaning of science actually is it's a method of inquiry, a very specific method of inquiry. You go through certain specific steps. You observe, make a hypothesis, and then you want to test the hypothesis, so you form an experiment to do that. And then you do the experiment. And once you do the experiment, you gather data from the experiment, and then you analyze that data and you form a conclusion. And the conclusion is scientific information. Did you get that? So science means you go through a process and then come to a conclusion. That is knowledge. But number 4, science also has a philosophy. Why am I saying this? Because when people use the word science, they can use it in any of these meanings. And unless you have really known what is being said, you're going to get all mixed up and talk in different wavelengths. And that is why there is so much of misinformation. So, what is that philosophy? The philosophy of science says this: all explanations, all, must be in terms of the laws of natural science. God and supernatural things must never be brought into the picture as a cause or explanation. That's the philosophy of science. This philosophy, by the way, is absolutely essential to keep science progressing. If you bring everything else in, then we'll have all kinds of things in the science classroom. Astrology and philosophy, no. Science says we are going to do it in this way, and when you do it in this way, you must keep out God from that picture. That is what science is, and it is correct. If you do anything about it, then you're going to wreck it up. But it is misused by the scientists. So we should know what science is in its use, and especially the philosophy of science. You should know its use, and you should also know how it is misused. That is what we're going to look at. That will be information which is giving us stability today. So what is that misuse? Here it is. Yeah. Since God and the supernatural causation are kept out of the studies, the secular scientist claims that God and supernatural causation do not exist. You keep it out, don't study it, and look this way and say it does not exist. That's a misuse of the philosophy. The philosophy is correct and good, but do not misuse it. And the majority of the public have been led to think that this conclusion that God and supernatural are not in existence, that is a scientific conclusion. No, it is not. If God has been so faulty reasoning, faulty logic. Why? Because if God has been kept outside the study, then no reasonable or credible comment can be made about God based on your study. Did you get that? You didn't study it, then you have nothing to say about it. This is not a private or personal opinion. Look at what the US National Academy of Sciences said. Science is a way of knowing about the natural world. It is limited to explaining the natural world through natural causes. Science can say nothing about the supernatural. Whether God exists or not is a question about which science is neutral. But what do the secular scientists say? They say science says this. Science doesn't. Science remains neutral. You can extrapolate that and you can put it into a worldview, but science itself has no worldview by itself except that we are dealing with natural causes. Therefore, says Erwin Schrödinger, he's a scientist, by the way, science sometimes pretends to answer questions in these domains, which is God and religion and the metaphysics, but the answers are often so silly that we are not inclined to take them seriously. Why do we not take them seriously? We can't. Because the answers from people who are not studying the subject, that is why. For example, now I'm a physician, so I'm going to take it from the world of medicine. A neurosurgeon has no grounds to dictate to the farmer how to grow his crops. Why? Because he's doing neurosurgery. He's not doing farming. Similarly, the scientist who studies only natural causes lacks the basis to comment on God and religion, anything to metaphysics. The common folk, like you and me, must not think that these statements by a scientist to say that we can talk about God, whether he exists or not, and usually they say he does not, because we are dealing with only natural causes, and therefore we'll discard anything that is supernatural, anything that is God. So knock it off. And they say that's scientific. But it is not. It is based on a philosophy of science that they have come to by consensus and not actually science. Do you get that? Yes. Why are we saying that? Because science is knowledge. And the fruit of all knowledge comes from only one source. We're going to come to that in a moment. The topic then for this session is very narrow and precise. Christians believe that one God created the universe as well as humans in his own image. Is this belief compatible with a basic understanding of modern science? That's the question. Because many believe that they are incompatible and irreconcilable. One cannot be a true Christian as well as a scientist, or one cannot be a true scientist as well as a Christian. But will this claim, will this scrutiny, will this claim, will this idea, concept stand real scrutiny? We're going to look at that. And we'll address the question with this one, the topic with this one question. How did modern science emerge? You know what the meaning of emerge? And I want you to follow that word right through today. Emerge. How did it start? How was it born? Because the origins of anything, whatever you do, whatever you think, the origin colors everything that happens after that. Are you with me? So the origins is what we're looking at. How did modern science emerge? The Oxford physicist and historian of science, Peter Hodgson, listed 4 raw materials or material necessities for the birth, origin, and growth of modern science. Number 1, a fairly well-developed society. You see, we are talking about a time when we did not know much about science. So to bring science about, you wouldn't have science working with a bunch of nomads who are looking and foraging for food the whole day. No, they're lost in looking for food. You need a well-developed society which have diversity of groups of people doing their thing, as well as some amount of affluence, so you can put away some resources to do science. So we needed a fairly well-developed society. Number 2, some simple technology to build and construct instruments, and stuff to do your experiments. You needed simple technology, yes. Number three, you needed a system of writing to keep record, accurate records. You also needed, number four, a system of mathematical notations, because not only should your information be accurate, your information should be precise, because in comparing one and two, the difference might be just a little bit. And so you needed mathematical notations. Many advanced ancient civilizations had all four. For example, the Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Indian, Chinese, Romans, and Greeks, none of them were able to formulate the modern scientific method of inquiry. It was left to modern times to develop the present day these methods that ushered in what we have today. Cambridge University chemist and historian of science Joseph Needham first posed this pertinent double header of a question, and he was referring to the birth of science. When was science born, and where was it born? When and where? That was the double header. The then referred to the period of the scientific revolution, 1500 to about 1750. There referred to a geographical location known as Western Europe. Now here's the key. We're going to look at it in just a little bit. The historians of science have identified that critical factor in Western Europe, which was absent in earlier civilizations, that enabled modern science to emerge. What is the other word for emerge? Give birth to, where it was born. So I'd like to paint this picture using the example of a project proposal. How many of you have written project proposals anytime? Some of you have. Okay, what's a project proposal? I'll give you a scene. I have a good project in mind, and it'll require money, but I don't have the money. That guy has the money. So a project proposal is a statement that I will make to convince him to part with his money to put into my project. That's a project proposal. I'm proposing this project. Now, when you look at a project proposal, you need at least a few things in that to convince this guy. Number one, you have to give it a name and describe your project. And number two, you must tell what your aims and goals are for doing this project. And then he must have an idea of what you're asking for in terms of the three M's: material, men, and money. You must tell him what all you need: personnel, material, and finances. And number four is what we are going to focus on. You must convince the person that when he has put his resources into it, you are going to succeed in your project. Did you get that? Yes. You need to convince him, otherwise he's not going to part with his money or any other resources. So you need to show that when you put that money in, you will succeed. So a project proposal, that fourth one is the key one. You know, at that time, we take laws of nature for granted. The laws of nature are there, laws of gravity, the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of electrodynamics, the laws of gravity. We know, in those days they did not know any of these laws. But we needed these laws to do science. So the project really, they had an idea that something was out there they might have an access to. What was those things out there? It was a vague idea, and so they said, let's look for the laws of nature. Because if there are no laws, we can't actually do science. Did you know that? Without an understanding of the laws of nature, you can't do science at all. So we're going to look for the laws of science, and that was the goal. But discovering these laws would require a huge outlay of resources. By the way, the resources were available. Yeah, he had the money. Now, how to get it out from him? You have to make a proposal. You have to make it so convincing that he will say, yes, I'll be a part of your project and we will all win together. It needed to be a compelling proposal, and therefore the justification for your project had to be strong enough to sway the public opinion. I hope you're getting a picture of this. Now, in those days, the civic power and finances were in the hands of the religious people, not just the business people. It was actually the bishops and the pastors who had the influence in those days, who actually had access to all the money. And therefore, the justification had to be a religiously based prediction. I'm giving you a theological reason why this project will succeed. You get that picture? That was the project proposal of those days. Only Western Europe, get this, only Western Europe was able to provide the needed religious justification. So sometimes we think, science and religion are far away. No, it was science that couldn't start without religious approval first. Most people today think that science is, way up there and religion is way down there. We are, reasonable and logical, and these guys, mythological, blind belief, third rate. Not really. Historically, science was completely beholden to religion because all the decision-making authority and all the finance necessary were in the hands of the clergy. In those days, scientists were not rich, influential, or powerful. So, it was the wisdom and the support of the religious leaders that permitted science to be born. So, the view that science and religion were at war is not based on factual information. Take a deep breath. Let's take a break for just a minute. Are you following? Okay. Take a deep breath. Let the circulation get going because we're going to ask a question now. What was that religious justification? Are you ready? Here we go. The theology in Western Europe, we said that's where it came. That's where it was born. During the scientific revolution was based on Christianity. So what we're going to look at is four Christian beliefs that provided the necessary justification to do science itself. Most people haven't looked at it this way, but I hope you get some information, knowledge. It'll stabilize your ideas. These four, number one, it was a monotheistic God that created the entire universe. Number two, in other words, you didn't need 5 or 6 gods fighting with each other, and one god over this jurisdiction, another on that, and he had his own laws and he had his own laws. How will you find a universal law? You won't. And so you would not find the laws of nature when there are 2 or 3 or 5 or 100 gods. No, one monotheistic God created the entire universe. Number two, this God was orderly and rational. There was a pattern to what he did. There was a system to what he did. And therefore you could find that system. And number three, humans were made in the image of God. Do you know that there is no other religion that clearly delineates this idea? Humans were made in the image of God. Number four, humans fell. Wow, what has that got to do with science? Watch, it's there. Humans, now once you fall, you become individually less reliable. Think about it. So all four, we're going to look at each of those four. Number one, monotheism. Contrast that with polytheism. For example, in the Hindu religion, there are multiple deities, gods and goddesses. There's no claim at all that all of them work together. Look, you have to work together to form the entire universe so that anyone looking into the universe can find a pattern in the entire universe. That is a law of nature. So if there are multiple, each one looking out for their own, we will not find that consistency. And by the way, the earliest writings of the Hindu religion are the Vedic writings. The Rig Veda of the four, Rig is the most authoritative. Look at this statement from section 10, song number 129, verse 6 of the Rig Veda. Who verily knows and who can here declare it? The gods are later than this world's production. Do you get that? That's what they say. The gods are later. Who then knows whence it first came into being? He, the first origin of the creation, whether he formed it all or did not form it. Whose eye controls this world in highest heaven, he verily knows it, or perhaps he knows not. Now, with this nebulousness as your foundation, you cannot tell somebody to give me money to do a project in which I'm going to look for laws all over. It must be consistent everywhere. Hey, there's confusion here. It's nebulous. That's why Hinduism could not produce that basis for science. Similarly, the Babylonians had multiple gods, the Egyptians, Assyrians, Romans, Greeks, multiple gods. But one of them, the Muslims, have only one. In fact, they are fiercely monotheistic. And if you want to, I'm going to say some words, but we're not going to look at the study of those words. Muslims are Unitarian monotheists. Christians are Trinitarian monotheists. Remember that. But a technical thing, but we will study that later if we have time for it. Why wouldn't the Islamic faith then produce this big idea of science? Here's the reason why, and it's an opinion. Probably because of a statement and a concept in Islamic faith which supersedes all rule or law, and it's called inshallah. Inshallah means the will of God. It is the top. All rules are subject to the will of Allah. In other words, you see some names on the screen. The Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim. These are the traditional writings apart from the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran is the core, and then these traditional writings are very, very valuable. They tell you about what to do. Now, in these writings, there are sections, and each section is named according to an individual who wrote it out. And so, for example, we have Sahih al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari wrote it. What's the meaning of Sahih? It describes the highest level of credibility of that hadith, of that writing. There are 4 levels. This is the highest. So when we look at these high levels of hadith, here's a statement you can read on the screen. Allah can forgive sins while providing no basis in justice or equity. At the same time, He can punish sins with no reference to any rule. That's inshallah. He is all powerful. He doesn't have to obey any rules at all. So when you look at all these, and by the way, the statement is based on lots of examples of what he does, and we don't have time to go to all those. But these examples show decisions that are arbitrary as well as capricious. So if consistency in applications of rule and law is not clearly portrayed in the dealings by this God, one cannot predict consistency and regularity of law in the creative works of such a God. If He can do this time here and another one over, then how can we really show that there is a consistency right through? We can't. And that is why, although Islam is the strongest in its monotheistic claim known as Tawhid, and despite building the mighty Ottoman Empire, it could not generate the basis for modern science, because inshallah means He can do what He wants anytime He wants. So scientists would never be able to find a predictable pattern. Christianity alone portrayed one God, yes, Trinitarian, but one, who worked consistently in line with rule and law. So number one, it has to be monotheism. Number two, it has to be a rational God. Even before the laws of nature were known, Christianity clearly proclaimed that God was reasonable, consistent, and He upheld rule and law. He didn't toss them out and say, it's my will. He upheld it. And this God of order, then, he was a God of order, had placed harmonious laws into his creation, and if he placed them there, then humans could possibly find them. And when we did find them, this is what Albert Einstein said about this natural laws. The harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. It's not even the thing, it is just a reflection that we have. Because of the supreme idea of a mind that was consistent and orderly. He also said these words: the scientist was moved by profound reverence for the rationality made manifest in existence, the grandeur of reason incarnate. What's the meaning of that? It means that there is a consistency, a logic, a reason, a pattern that has been embedded into the structure of the universe. That is what Einstein is saying here. It is embedded into the structure. Nobody can take it out. You can't tamper with it. It is there. This Christian God does not indulge in arbitrary or capricious behavior. In making ultimate moral decisions, he is so reasonable and predictable that a clear pattern is discernible. Therefore, if he did the creation, then his creation would reflect orderliness, and humans would be able to find regularities called natural laws. That was number two. Number three, God's model. Humans were created in God's model of rationality. Reason and judgment were placed within the psyche of humans so that choices could be made based on information, logic, and common sense. Using these, reason and judgment, humans could devise rational and scientific methods to unlock the secrets of the laws of nature. And that you can see that if you use reason and judgment, you can't simply look at something and say that's a law. No, you got to go through steps. And so the steps of the modern method of scientific inquiry were born. What are the steps? I mentioned them. Make observations, form a hypothesis, devise experiments, test the hypothesis by the experiments, gather and analyze the data, and finally make your conclusions. So the rationality, that means reason, logic, pattern, embedded into nature by a rational, orderly God, would be understood by humans who were created in the model of God's rationality. Since humans and God were matched, the laws of nature were bound to be discovered. Did you get that? No other religious tradition ever said it this way, could offer such a crisp and clear prediction and basis to justify the massive resources that would be required for the endeavor. And when you look at the scientific revolution, we know that this theory was proved correct. Number four, the fall. That's a strange thing, right, to talk about science and the fall and how are they connected, but they are. Christian theology, by the way, only Christian theology describes a sudden, clear-cut fall. No other theology describes this. Humans fell from their perfect righteous state and today are fallen and fallible. Said Stephen Meyer himself, a PhD scientist, we are vulnerable to self-deception, flights of fancy, and premature jumping to conclusions. How many of us know that? Yeah, we all do it all the time. So suppose somebody stands up and says, I'm a scientist and I'm saying this. We can't take him at his word. He fell. So now what do we need? We had to have a system that allowed us to submit our findings and our theories to an objective and rigorous investigation. We cannot take one person's at his word. He has fallen. We need some way of corroboration. And that's where then the ideas came in. Hey, we can't take his word alone. We need to have what? Repeatability of his experiments. We need to have corroboration, meta-analysis, double-blind studies. I'm using words to describe what? The modern steps of science. Why? Why do we need all these steps? Because humans had fallen. That is why we need the steps. Can you see now all these four ideas come only from Christianity that actually set the stage and actually by which modern science was born? So the four factors: monotheism, the rationality of God, the fact that humans were created in God's image of His rationality, and the fact that humans fell. These beliefs together formed powerful grounds to justify the project, because now with these we could say we will find the laws of nature if we do it in this particular way, in this particular method. What did Western Europe do? It obliged and opened its coffers. No other religious tradition could provide such a sturdy base for the project we call the scientific revolution. Now, we've given ourselves a fairly good base. But there's one more thing. It's called the minimal facts approach. The minimal facts approach, described by scholar Gary Habermas, describes two factors that are required to give credibility to a claim. And we've made a claim that Western Europe brought about science because of Christian theology. So we made the statement. And we looked at the four factors and they seemed reasonable. But now we need number two. So our study of the four beliefs in Christian theology that provided the justification satisfies the first factor of this minimal facts approach. Declaration by scientists, philosophers, and historians of science who spoke in a nearly unanimous voice support the second factor, which we are going to just look into now. Take a break, 2 minutes, 10 seconds. Take a deep breath and stretch out if you want, stand up if you want. Yeah, ready to go? Yes, yeah, of course, stand up. I do it every 10 or 15 minutes when I go out to do lectures. So it's a good thing. So what are we going to look at? The second factor. What's the first factor? A good amount of evidence. Second factor, somebody else who looked at the subject and came to the same conclusion. Are you with me? That is actually the method of doing science. So the second one. I've got 7 statements. Look at each of them. Each of them, I've highlighted some words. By the way, the highlighted words are my words, that my highlighting, okay? I did the highlighting. But I want you to watch those words. Number 1, statement here. It was quotes, by the way, they are all quotes. It was the world view of the Christian faith that uniquely enables science to emerge, to be born and flourish as a systematic self-correcting discipline. Number 2, it is the Christian world which finally gave birth in a clear and articulate fashion to the experimental method of science itself. Number 3, the rise of science came directly from the Christian doctrine of the world as a divine creation. The matter in the universe had order and obeyed certain rules. Why? Because of the God who created them. Number 4, the universe is governed by a single God and is not the whims of many gods, each governing his own province according to his own laws. This monotheistic view seems to be the historical foundation for modern science. Number 5, I called modern science a legacy. I might even have said a child of Christianity. By the way, that's from a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. Number 6, science depends on a natural order that is the product of a single intelligence from which our own intelligence descends. Number 7, the last one for this morning. It was monotheism that launched the coming of physical science, for it premised an intelligible world. Intelligible means comprehensible. We could comprehend, we could understand it. It had a blueprint which was therefore open to the searchers of the scientists. You know, those words I've highlighted, and some of them were italics and underlined. I'm going to put them together. Watch and see what happens here. Note the words that connect Christianity and science. Emerge, gave birth, came directly from. It's a foundation. And science is a child of Christianity. It's the product. And Christianity launched science itself. No other religion relates to science so closely and powerfully. Hence, many of the researchers during the scientific revolution were Bible believing scientists, Christians. Copernicus, Sir Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, Rene Descartes, Roger Bacon, Johannes Kepler, Galileo Galilei, to name a few. And the trend continues today. Look at these two statements. The first is by Michael Guillen, a triple PhD in physics, astronomy, mathematics. Very few do those three together, by the way. He wrote a book, Believing is Seeing, and the subtitle of that book is How Science Shattered His Atheism. So he did an analysis. He looked at the worldview of Christians, the worldview of atheists, and the worldview of science. And this is what he said. When I first did this analysis, I noticed that the Christian worldview is fundamentally in line with the scientific worldview. The next one is by John Lennox, professor of mathematics in Oxford University. The fact that we are created in the image of a rational God makes real sense as an explanation of why we can do science. He didn't say of why we do science, why we can do science, why we are able to do science, because of what we do and what we live as Christians. So the conclusion, Christian theology formed the sole religious justification to search for the laws of nature, based on which we have the scientific revolution, and boy, have we done well with that. Only Christian theology could justify the massive expenditure of material, manpower, and finance that was needed to undertake and succeed in the endeavor of modern science. And the scientific revolution, we know, was a resounding success. The claim that science is directly opposed to religion and Christianity goes against the facts of science, Christianity, and history. The challenge today is to go past, become informed. Knowledge will get you stability. Become informed. The challenge is to go past the loud and vociferous propaganda that is prevalent today and become correctly and truthfully informed. So I'll close with these words. If we were in a court of law, and if you were the jury, and if I was an attorney with my closing statements, I would say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here are the facts and the arguments. And the arguments are clear and convincing. Christianity is the mother of modern science. Therefore, they are inseparable. Science, Christian theology, and the facts of history establish this beyond reasonable doubt. I rest my case. Thank you.
So at this time, we are going to have a Q&A session. So we are hoping that for 10 minutes, if you have any questions on this very heavy topic, which I'm sure you have, we have a microphone that is set up for you, or we can bring the Roman microphone to you also. So if you have any questions for our good doctor here, now is the time for them.
Thank you, Dr. Pandit, for the wonderful session that we just had. In my estimation, the weakest thing in science is not the scientific method, it's the scientist.
Just a little slower.
Okay.
So I can get it.
Right. What is your thought on presuppositions? Like, a scientist will say, well, the evolutionary theory has to be true, and therefore I'm going to establish my whole scientific method based on a bunch of presuppositions, worldviews.
Yes.
That will taint the scientific method.
That's an excellent question, because when you look at the deep facts of wherever you're coming from, you will have to agree that when you ask the questions over and over again and carry on to a certain point, you will come to the place where your final assumption cannot be proved. None of them. That is why they are called belief systems. Now, the problem with what we are dealing with, let's just say you mentioned the theory of evolution. The problem with theory of evolution and theory of creation, both are belief systems. Creationists agree that it's a belief system. Evolutionists don't. They say it's a scientific system. So once you have a disparity, you must now look for how to deal with that. Both are worldviews, by the way. Both are worldviews. Both have assumptions that you cannot prove at all. So how do we go about it? Here's one way in which you can do. Don't debate the actual factors. Debate or go to the next level, which is called the predictions, not the assumptions, because the assumptions cannot be proved. So go to the predictions. What should we see today if actually evolution took place? What should we see today if actually creation took place? None of us were there to witness either evolution or creation. But we can look at the predictions, and that's a very fundamental idea of science. You look at predictions. If this, then this. If this has happened, then this will. When you look at that, that is the place where we can look at things within reach, because now we are looking to what we can find here if A was correct or if B was correct. And when you look at that, you will find that the prediction, the basic predictions of these two can be evaluated. And when they are evaluated, all you can find is the weight of evidence. And the weight of evidence is very, very powerfully on the side of God and creation. In fact, tomorrow, this is the next of my session. We're dealing with the next subject, which is science and the theory of evolution. So we'll come to that. You see, what we did today and what we do tomorrow are kind of different, but it comes to the same conclusion. Today, what we did was a public opinion that disconnected two concepts: science and reason on one side, they say, and religion and faith, and especially Christianity on the other. They said they were disconnected. That was the public opinion. Today we saw that's wrong. They are connected. In fact, we just saw that Christianity gave birth to modern science. Now, how much closer can you get than a mother and daughter? You can't get any closer. Tomorrow, we're going to look at something the opposite way. They say that science and the theory of evolution are actually close together. In fact, one is locked in with the other. We're going to utilize our God-given reasoning and look at that tomorrow. Good question. Yes.
I just have two comments, two follow-up comments. I totally agree. The evidence for creation, it's an avalanche. And in Romans 1, Paul tells us that they were without reason, without excuse, because the evidence is overwhelming. And just to give you an example, if you were to try to do the probability of a human cell or any other cell that would be created by natural random processes, the probabilities are beyond astronomical. In other words, at certain levels, they're 10 to the power of 200. Man, which granted we don't know too much about the universe, very little actually, the number of total subatomic particles in the entire universe is only 10 to the power of 90. So you could have, and then other noted scientists like James Tour, who was a chemist and nanoengineering and material scientist, he puts the probability at 10 to the power of a number with a trillion zeros. I mean, it's just unfathomable. It's just not possible based on the probabilities. And another thing is the predictions, right? Yeah. The DNA code in evolution, which is just really an unsubstantiated conjecture, should be strengthening the DNA code. And what we see is just the exact opposite. You have mutations and errors in the DNA code that's being copied, so that you get more diseases, more malfunction, more issues. So it's actually showing the fall is, the evidence is there to show that the fall is, deeper.
Thank you. This is question time, so I will prefer questions because there's a whole lot more than we can talk, actually, quite a lot more. Anyone else have any question? I know this is science and we're not usually used to science, but remember the wave that goes out into the public today and the wave that is like a tsunami that swings the people is from science. So some of us has to raise the standard here and say, wait a minute. Science doesn't say that, what you are saying. We have to say it in terms of science, not in terms of our belief. And that is the basis of my ministry. When I go out and I usually speak on secular university campuses, that's my ministry, I can't use God and Bible. They don't believe that. So how can we talk about that when you and I don't believe in that? So we should come to a place where we both talk the same language. And that's why I specifically talked only on science today. I didn't go to the Bible or I didn't go to any other source. Look at that. And God has placed, like I just said during the presentation, He has embedded into the structure of the universe the evidence that any rational thinking human mind needs to come to a solid conclusion that beyond the whole thing there is something known as the supernatural. And if there is the supernatural dimension, then somebody must live there. And if that somebody must live there, he cannot be just a power. If we describe him as just a power, then you have failed to describe my and your personality. So he has to have a personality out there. So slowly we build up the idea that ultimately there is a person. And the clearest description of that person is found in the Bible. Just a little slowly, okay?
Yes.
So
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, it just seems that, even if you are to explain things very clearly with simple facts, that because of the, paradigm that people come to these things with, it's very difficult to convince people. And so I was just curious in your experience as far as sharing this information with people, how many people do you think, like when you go on university campuses, how many people are willing to see things and change their minds about things, and I guess the word would be converted to a different way of thinking? How open-minded are people?
I can't give you a number, but I can say this. Outside there in the world, there is a desperate search for somebody to please give me a reason. Don't tell me what to believe. Give me a reason. And are everyone doing? No. Are the majority looking for that? No. But there are those who are really looking for it. They are struggling out there. And there may be few, but you know who those few are? They are the thinkers. And the thinkers are the leaders in their community. And sometimes we don't like to face them because they're going to ask us hard questions and then we will look foolish. But we need people among us who can answer them. That was the strength of the first Christian church in the first century. Everyone couldn't prove that Jesus is the Messiah. But there were some. Paul, Stephen, Apollos. Just a few. That is all they did, and they stabilized the whole church. Because they were able to answer everything from there. We need people like that, and we need information like that that can stabilize us. So we don't need to convince them all. But let me just mention to you, because you asked a very specific question about responses. There are three, maybe. Some of them, no, I don't care what you say. In fact, there was a person who looked at me and said, "Look, you're making good sense, but I don't want it." So I can't do anything about that. Even God says, "I give you freedom of choice." Number two is those who say, "Golly, man, I didn't know there was this kind of information, but it's too hard. This is the first time I'm hearing this. How can I make up my mind?" Okay. So they walk off. Some of them 1 week later, some of them 2 weeks later, some of them months, some of them 5 years later, they say, "I got it now." So we don't know what's going to happen right there. But here's the third. I have seen avowed atheists becoming believers in 1 hour because they have been searching. They were wishing somebody would tell it in these words. I'll give you just maybe one example. I was asked to debate. I don't do debates. I prefer not to do. But if you challenge me to a debate, I will not shy away. But I don't like debates. But when I went to MIT, you know what MIT is? Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Arguably the top technological scientific institution in the world. I've been there 4 times because they like this kind of talk. They don't like you telling them what to believe. Give us a reason. So I went there, they said, "Doc, these guys in the atheistic club," by the way, the atheistic club is much bigger than the believers club. "They want to debate you. They're going to send their man." So, like I said, I don't like it, but if you challenge me, I'm not going to run away. So they said, "All right." So they called the audience, and he standing on that side, and me. We had a good discussion, half an hour for him, half an hour for me. But that's not really the story. In the audience, there was a young girl who had just come to MIT from China. Now, in China, there's no such thing as God. You worship your ancestors. So there's no God there. So she had just come, and I mean, to get into MIT, you got to be, grades way up there, sky high, stratosphere. And then you go through all the application and all the interviews, and then she got in. Idea of God was something completely foreign to her. So when she came to the United States, she was totally confused. What are these people doing? Going to church? And they're kneeling down and praying, and sometimes they'll look up to pray, and she would look up to see if there's somebody there. And so she was watching very carefully the whole debate and all the Q&A sessions like we're having just now. And at the end, she told the organizers, "Can I talk to him?" Meaning me. So they said, "Yeah, he's sitting there all by himself, go." So she came and sat next to me and said, "Look, Doc, I'm from China, and I don't know anything about God. In fact, I know so little that I don't even know the words to ask my questions. But when I sat here, you put up the questions on the screen. Hey, they were my questions. And then you answered them. And then she just looked at me and said, I am no longer atheist." So have I responded? It's a whole spectrum. But thank you very much, and I hope the other speakers will carry on and build us to a real good place where we face the world. We have a tremendous message.